One of my windows into what I'll call psychological and physiological dis-ease is early in the morning. And so there's a little bit of a tension between avoiding psychological pain, depression, fear, smallness, and basking in what can be a healing resonance, a healing peace. And what I want to do here is peel back the layers and also make a distinction between the different psychological states and where I think they come from, and the blocks in the environment. So the first thing to focus on, I think, is that I feel very small. So how small? Maybe 4 or 5 years old, I feel very small. And there's a whole world out there that I don't understand, that feels very big, that I don't feel I belong in, that I feel afraid of being found out and afraid of being hurt. And so this is a really present feeling in the 4, 5, particularly in 4 and 5. But what's more interesting to me is that this feeling is 60 to 70% of my feeling in this body today. So 60 to 70% of my feeling and my physiology is of being very small. And what my physiology is waiting for is being hit. As I sit here today in this 4 to 5 so small, helpless, terrified, so 4 to 5, small, helpless, terrified, waiting to be hit and waiting to be hated. Now, what's tragic and traumatic about this state is there is nothing that my 4 and 5-year-old wants less than to be hit and to be hated. And there is nothing that my 4 and 5-year-old wants more than to be held. To be held and to be loved is the single most desperate desire of this 4 and 5-year-old. Which means to be held and to be loved is my most desperate desire, with an overlay so if you think of whatever me is, the ego consciousness, there is a physiological, psychological overlay If you think of light and, a red overlay that tints 70% of the light red. To be held, to be wanted, to be safe, to be welcome as I am, is the most desperate desire of this 4- and 5-year-old. And it's not met anywhere around me. This kind of desperation can take a number of different forms. What this I think the other crisis is not being asked to choose, not being asked, well, I'll just leave this. I'm specifically working with waking up consciousness, without changing my body, because that's part of the process of dissociating from these inner ages. So to be held, to be loved, to be safe, to hide. I don't want to be asked anything. I don't want to be asked for anything. I don't want to be expected to do anything. I don't want to leave the arms that are holding me. I want to stay there forever and escape the terror that's in the base of my spine. Now, this terror in the base of my spine, it's about a fistful big at the core of my sacrum. It is so tight and has been tight for so long that over the last 15 years, really a bit longer, but over the last 15 years in particular, my legs have gone numb. In a variety of different ways. Calf muscles, very, very tight. Thigh muscles, very, very tight. Back, the whole sacrum area, butt area, really tight. And I can't let go, because to let go is to feel the smallness, the helplessness, the terror, waiting to be hit, expecting to be hit, expecting to be hated. And the desperate need to be held, to be safe, to be loved, to be invisible has no reply in the cult, in the environment. There's no place around me that offers solace for this part. Now, this is 70% of my consciousness. 70% of my energy is modulating, is present to this terror, to this pain. And it's not responded to. It's not responded to at 5 years old. It's not responded to at 6 years old. It's not responded to at 4 years old. It's not responded to throughout the entirety of that time until now. Now, there are There are moments that can be measured in minutes. There are moments that can be measured in minutes where there is an antidote, where there is an answer. But this terrain is not mapped out. And those moments come to an end. And the void returns. The loneliness, the dissociation, the desperation, the void returns. Now, I want to talk a little bit about my environment. I want to talk about Thailand, why it's 3 times safer. And I want to talk about the grief, because there is a balloon. There is a balloon of energy that intersects with this intensity. And I would call this intensity holding on and being terrified of dying. Holding on and being terrified of dying. Being completely alone and having nothing to hold on to except the tension in my own body. In the absence of being held, in the absence of being loved, in the absence of being safe, in the absence of being seen. This is one of the greatest tragedies of our time, is that a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old is never going to be able to speak in the format that I'm using at age 44. It takes a 30, a 40, a 50, a 60, a 70-year-old adult, an emotionally literate adult, an emotionally mature empath, someone capable of empathy, to see this terror that has been in my eyes, that has been in my field, that has been in my body, my entire life. This terror that is shutting me down. This terror that affects my breath, and through the control of my breath, my entire psyche and physiology. If we wait as a culture, until the age of 44, 60% of me is already dead, dissociated, exhausted, shortened lifespan, lonely, unable to be present, PTSD. 60% of me is already dead. The very simple act of controlled breath, which is one way, if you notice, I noticed when I broke my elbow, and I should say that in terms of sharp traumatic physical pain, which I have successfully avoided almost all of my adult life. Breaking my radial head a month ago and having it twist, and then simultaneously breaking the scapuloid bone and simultaneously, bruising and damaging all the tendons and muscles, etc., such that, I'm still learning to move my hand. Doing all of this in 7, 8, 9 out of 10 pain is nothing compared to the psychological grief, terror, loneliness, and the need to shut down and look away of the 4 and the 5-year-old. That is a 70% overlay of my body and my consciousness. And it's worth remembering that much like a tree, it may be a 200-year-old oak tree, but the first 4 years of that 200-year-old oak tree lie in the molecular pattern in the ring that if you cut a tree down, you will see the pattern and you will see the impact of the environment on the 4-year-old ring within the tree. Meaning a tree's structural stability is created not by the last or the present year's growth. That bit is always fragile. The cambium cannot hold up a tree. It is the woody interior of the past. It is the molecular memory of the past that supports the fragile new development in the present. The cambium and this year's growth is always fragile. A tree that weighs 50, 100 tons is not held up by what is developing in the ring of the present. It is held up or it falls down by the memory of what it was at its core. It is the core that keeps the tree vertical and solid. It is the first memory. And it's also worth knowing that that is growing. That this is not something that is static. Now, if you can think of a 4-year-old tree, a 4-year-old tree might have been 12 feet tall. But a 200-year tree may be 100 feet tall. Now, if you cut the tree up higher than 12 feet, the rings that did not exist, the first-year ring, the second-year ring, the third-year ring, the fourth-year ring, they did not exist in above 12 feet at 1 year. At 1 year, the tree was a foot tall. So when you cut the ring of, when you do a cross cut on a tree and count the rings, where is the first ring coming from when you cut the tree up 20 feet tall? Where is it? How is it? And that's there is a memory, there is a pattern that's being replicated as long as the tree is growing that has influence. there's also a record of the environment. Meaning, one of the reasons that trees are cut down by scientists is to retroactively calculate the weather. Because you can see that this ring to this ring is fatter than this ring to this ring, which is fatter than this ring to this ring, which means there was more water. There were more favorable conditions to growth. And that record does not change. The fact that there is an abundant river of water at year 30 does not change the pattern of what went on in year 4. The record of what was before stays static within the thickness of the ring relative to the other rings. As the psyche develops more and more personas, as the psyche develops new personas to coat the core persona, you have a core persona, the innocence of a child. You start developing in every new environment, in every moment, a new persona is called forth. This is a new persona that didn't exist before this video. Not in this way. This persona is called forth for this purpose. A purpose of transparency and revealing that which is hidden within our cult. As each new environment calls forth a new persona to respond to the context, to reference the underlying needs to survive, to feel secure, to feel love and belonging, to have self-esteem, to develop one's unique gifts. To create abundance and share those gifts. To transcend the limited identity of the individual ego and start thinking beyond, as each need is met in its hierarchical order in a given environment. A persona grows, modulates, attunes, evolves. How to succeed in this environment. How to create another environment and so I can succeed. The tragedy of our culture is that the terrified, needy 4- and 5-year-old cannot succeed to meet the desperate hunger for security and survival in the feminine, in my emotional self. My body was not in jeopardy. It was my heart. It was my feminine that had so much violation and so little refuge, so much pain and suffering, so small a place to come home. And in the minutes by which I measure the moments of peace for that 4- and 5-year-old, it is coated. It is coated by the panic. It is dampened by the panic that however desperately I need that, what is offered is measured in minutes. This child needs this for an eternity. needs it long enough to go into the belly of grief, of terror, of shaking, of freezing, and knowing that the container will not disintegrate, will not fall apart until he is through the biological wall, through the chemical wall of pent-up terror, of pent-up shame, of pent-up fear and certainty that he will never be loved, that he will never be safe, that whatever is there, it will fall away in a moment with no control. Whatever nurturing is there, it'll collapse in seconds, and they'll be out alone and in the void again. That there's no regulation. There's no regulation between him and his desperation and his loneliness and the way the outer culture responds. Because mom was there for a few seconds, and then she hated him. She was there, and then the car crashed. She was there, and then she tuned out and went into empty space and could not be reached, no matter how loud he screamed. She couldn't be reached in the void of her own dissociation, in the void of her own fantasy, in the void of her own numbness. That he could not be reached without hitting him, without scaring him into violence. That there's no one there to hold that terror. I cannot begin to empathize because within our culture's framework, the intensity and the timelessness of this fog of dread and terror goes on forever and ever, without end. Now, this is so intense that I can't look at it at 44 years old directly. I can't bear to be in my body looking at what he's going through directly. It is way too big for me. I get lost and I become him. I, at 44, do not have the mass that can resist the endless whirlpool into traumatic abandonment, terror, loneliness, and fear. And I am much bigger than him. He is in the whirlpool. And the gravitational pull into that timeless and endless loop of terror is much bigger. Think of a pea. Think of a pea in an ocean whirlpool. If a pea had legs, if a pea could swim, the pea could exhaust itself for 1,000 years and never be able to swim up that current. The scale, the sheer scale of being in an ocean whirlpool, moving at 25, 30, 40 miles an hour, and swimming frantically upstream against that current, trying to get air at 4, 5, 6 miles per hour for an experienced swimmer, half a mile an hour for a little infant, is absolutely terrifying. One cannot look at the forces involved without being overwhelmed by the hopelessness, the helplessness, and the trauma that intensity represents, because it is so much bigger than the child. And that is where the terror, the desperation, the need to be held, to be loved, to feel a sense of safety in the folds, in the body rhythms, in the field, in the energetic and emotional field of something big enough to counteract this traumatic vortex. He needs an adult. And he needs an adult that is stronger than I am. He needs an adult that is stronger than my parents. There may have been an adult strong enough to do this at school, but he needs an adult to actually do it, to actually hold a field and hold him so that together the little pea and the giant can counteract the force of the whirlpool that is so overwhelming he can't open his eyes. When to open one's eyes is a traumatic event, because it reveals the motion going down, going down, going down, so many times faster and stronger. It is a state of despair. It is a state of profound and utter dissociation. Breathing is an ordeal. There's too much shock to cry. Now he wakes up in my body because there's nowhere else for him to go. Because my world's a little bit safer than his world. And I wake up with him in my body, and I know what I need because I know what he needs. I need a mother's skirts. I need someone's legs to cling to wrap my little arms around and hold on tight. I need someone to lift me up and hold on tight and understand what I'm going through and not let go. And not let go. And help me come back into my body. But I look around in my world and feel overwhelmed. If I so much as hint that I can't pay the rent, that's a sign of weakness. And the social ranking that I've gained from being able to weather a recession and weather this and always pay my rent on time for 15 years goes down. And I'm now in feminine terrain that gets muscled around, gets patronized, dominated, intimidated more, which is terrifying. To be exploited, to be used, to be sociopathically pushed by pins and needles. How far can we push this person in a feminine state? It's terrifying for this amount of pain, so I can't turn there. So I turn to my neighbors. Can I reach out? Can I connect with my neighbors? They look at me with strange and hostile eyes. What do you want? Why are you coming around? Whatever it is, you're a little strange. And we don't want that around here. There's no skirts to hold on to, no comfort. I can go into that a little bit. How you doing? Well, I'm a little bit scared about this and this. Oh, I get that. Now goodbye. There's no one to cling to that will say it's going to be okay. Because I don't feel, with this 70% overlay, I don't feel like a 44-year-old man. I feel like a 4- and 5-year-old boy, where it could all fall apart in a minute and I'll be all alone and no one will respond. There's no one to call. If I call up, can you hold me? Call me next week. I'm busy right now. I can't deal with this alone. I'm feeling really small. Well, I can hear them typing in the background. I could be as small as an atom. And no matter how small I feel, their culturated brain says, some guy's feeling a little bored. I don't have time for this. I'll be a little nice, but I've got to carry on doing stuff. There's no urgency to the soul's dilemma. There's no urgency to the psychological crisis. I feel like I'm going to not exist in a few minutes. And there's no place to respond. And that tininess correlates with just stay in an eternity until next week. And then maybe I'll give you 20 minutes. I don't need 20 minutes. I need to be held for an eternity until I feel safe that I'm in a sane world that understands what my body is going through and what torment and what trauma induced my body into this state, and what love and what human decency and kindness can take me out of it. I want to wake up in a sane world. In a sane world where the holding and the prioritization of that which is within me, the rings within the oak, are recognized, are respected, are seen. with the same intelligence as the cambion, where the fabric of the psyche, where our core is given an honored position within the cult that it already occupies in its influence over the cult that is currently suppressed. That the trillions lost in the economy, that the trillions lost in dissociation, that the trillions of moments of addicted misery in our cult is correlated to this position to abandon and betray that 4-year-old within and without, or to respond, or to honor. I want to wake up in that world, and I wake up alone in a world that does not even have time to understand what it does not know that it does not know. I wake up in a world that does not know that it does not know this, and that is impatient, angry, and violent even, at the imposition of the time required to even find out what it doesn't know it doesn't know. I feel like I wake up in a world in which termites are eating away at the core, hour by hour by hour, creating a forest that can blow over in the smallest winds, rotting away the structural integrity of the cult's core, while pretending that it takes too much time to understand what a termite is, to understand what a core is, to understand what the wood is, and to understand the far-reaching devastation, individually, in the family, in the community, and in the culture, to not responding, to not understanding, to one day, when a single storm knocks down 80% of the trees in the forest, and then there is still not time to examine this because of the devastation that comes when there are no more trees. It is an endless loop of willful ignorance, of willful denial, in which the messenger, please help me, please look over here, in which the messenger is targeted for dissociation, patronization, discarding, deranking, in a self-referential loop that ensures chronic invisibility. Because when anyone who speaks about this terrain is processed through a machine that deranks anyone speaking about this, or this, in an addicted and frenetic, in a frantic culture of distraction, that which is deranked for its femininity, for its yin position, never gets priority by the simple mechanism that a self-referential deranking, anyone who talks about that which is feminine is deranked, in a cult that floods itself with overstimulation. The 10th priority never gets attention. Starting up tennis, a new show on TV, the latest iPhone, and all of its hassles of new cars on the tires, new tires in the car, new 4K TV gets prioritized. I mean, the difference between a good HD TV and a 4K TV is, 5-10%? If you get Blu-ray movies, blah, blah, blah. It's hardly noticeable. And yet we as a cult have millions of hours for millions of people to spend 2 hours selecting and researching the TV, another 2 hours talking about it, another 2 hours driving around and shopping and looking for the best price, and another 2 hours installing it, and another hour getting rid of the old thing and what's going on here. We have 9 hours to invest by the millions, which means we have over 1 billion hours to invest as a cult in that transition. Full HD to 4K, something that isn't noticeable. On DVDs, only Blu-rays, only a few. More than 1 billion hours. And billions of dollars are spent on that transition. Because how could the desperation of a 4- and 5-year-old buy the millions? How could the desperation of a 4- and 5-year-old who's been trying to get my attention for 44 years be more important when it's killing our culture, rotting out the core, rotting out the immune system, rotting out the integrity of the body, when my legs are going numb, when the depression is setting in, when I spend $200,000 trying desperately to flood this mass of consciousness with stimulation, paragliding, hang gliding, this country, this sex, that media, this media, when I spend $200,000 trying to flood this part with enough distraction that it does not get sucked in to a vortex that I don't know how to swim out of. I don't know how to pull him out of the funnel. I just know how to get sucked in and become him, and then do anything to get out. which I, as a 44-year-old running a company, have distractions that can pull me out, have addictions that can numb. Something that a 4 and 5-year-old doesn't have. He's got a dark funnel inside his mind that goes down and down and down and down in a self-referential loop that says, if I was loved, I would be lovable. I'm not loved, so I'm not lovable. If I'm not lovable, I won't be loved. If I'm not loved, I'll never get out. If I never get out, I'll be here forever. I don't want to be here forever. I want to die. I want to die. I want to die. I don't want to be here. I want to die. I want to die. I don't want to be here. And there's no time. This goes on forever. It's not safe. I don't want to grow up. I don't want to live. I don't want to be here. I'm not loved, so I must not be worthy of being loved by those gods that know everything. I'm not loved, and I can't get out. No one's ever come down here to be with me because I'm not worthy, and I'll be stuck here forever. And I can't breathe. It's so tight. All I can do to distract myself is hold all the tension and muscles in my body so tightly, and never let go. There's at least the tightness of holding all my muscles, at least that tightness won't abandon me. The tightness of my muscles won't abandon me, and I won't be all alone here. The tightness of my muscles will be here with me. The tightness of my breath will be here with me. I'm frozen here. I'm frozen here. And there's an incredible shame in the next years. There's an incredible shame. Because the one that moves on, the 6-year-old, moves on knowing that an incredible crime was committed. And that at the core of that crime, there's a barb. And barb is an intensely shot arrow of impact that says you're not worth it. You're not worth seeing. You're not worth saving. You're not worth protecting. Your feminine self, half of who you are, is not only not worth saving and protecting, it is to be actively attacked. It is to be actively hated. Condemnation, patronization, disgust, humiliation. My terror, my desperation, my panic is to be batted away with hostile impatience. You fucking snot-nosed kid, get the fuck out of my way. Can't you see I need to do this for you? Can't you see you're standing in my way? Come on, get this kid out of here. Sherilyn, get this kid out of here. I've got to do this. When that terror is not only seen, not only not loved, not only not comforted, but is hated with disgust. The impact of that arrow cuts the psyche in half. Because the witness, the masculine, cannot bear that state of helplessness in which half of us is hated and disgusted. It can't bear the helplessness. There's a P with a giant. The inevitability of failure, the inevitability of shame, the inevitability of rage, the inevitability of violence and shock. When the more I express this part of me, the more I am traumatized again and hated. It's too much. It's too much. And so a line gets drawn right through the center of the 6-year-old. That says enough helplessness, enough smallness, enough terror, enough freezing, enough silence, enough shame, enough loneliness, and enough unlovability. I am no longer going to ask for help for that which receives none. I am no longer going to protect that which is not protected. I am no longer going to feel that which no one around me will honor. I am no longer going to fight a battle in which one pinky of the giant knocks me over even before I draw my sword. I don't want to be helpless. I don't want to feel the endless paralysis of that. I will become a mirror of my abuser. And in the harmonics of that alignment, my consciousness will go through a transformation in which I move from the one who failed to protect her inside to the one who killed her by identifying with the giant. I will realign my identity to the harmonic frequency, to the pattern of violation and abuse. And I will identify with the giant who can easily kill a pea. And I will feel powerful. And in doing so, I will reverse the polarity. It's like an electrical current. If you've ever hooked up a 9-volt DC battery to a 12-volt DC battery in opposition, it creates heat, and it can create fire. If you put negative and positive reverse polarities, connect the positive of the 9-volt battery to the negative of the 12-volt battery, and they both have similar amperages. The 9-volt battery will not triumph in terms of sending its polarity out into the world. What happens is that it's a tug of war, and a net 3 volts will come through, determined by the 12-volt battery's polarity. It's a matter of mass. The 9-volt battery disappears. The 12 volts goes down from 12 volt to 3 volts, but its pattern remains. The psyche of a small child, it's not a 9 to 12 comparison. It's 1 volt to 30, 1 volt to 12. The child feels completely invisible as it exerts its pattern. It is consumed by the pattern of the cult and the parent, the school, and the siblings. But as their polarity is reversed, as they go from attacking the inner feminine rather than trying to protect it, there is a dissociation that occurs from the wound. The feminine goes dark and is now the other. I am now the abuser. And I am now powerful with an entire culture and family system at my back. I am the spearhead. I am the new blade of the spear. That is my culture. That is my family. That is my dogma. And it's mine. It's no longer that which abused me. It is that which I am. A dissociation, a relief of pain. A polarity, a new identity, a new persona that can survive, feel secure, feel a sense of love and belonging. Us against them, the masculine against the feminine in all of us. You too can go to school and learn mathematics, geometry, algebra. Now, why exactly are you learning all that? Is it really that your parents are staying up late, solving trigonometry problems into their 80s, thrilled that this gives them rent money for another day? Is it really that these masculine thought patterns and sciences are so much more useful than learning to cook or learning to build a house even? Or is it that this is part of the cult's statement that that which is masculine and even that which never gets used, meaning why should you learn this so that you can get your certificate? Not because you're going to need it in daily life. Even that which is masculine and never gets used makes you superior to that which is feminine and is needed every day of every moment in all of our lives. Listening skills, they're needed all the time. Not a single hour. Because to listen is feminine. It's a feminine posture. Empathy, needed every moment of every day, for every day of every human that we're born. Every human that's ever existed has needed the skill of empathy. Not a single hour is dedicated to the science of empathy, to the biology of empathy, to the culture of empathy, because it's feminine. And instead, one hears more than 1,000 times before graduating high school, in one way or another, with a look, with behavior, and often in words, if you have the audacity to have such a feeling, don't tell anyone. You will get slaughtered, because you will have identified yourself as containing the enemy, the feminine, within. Don't tell anyone. you will get slaughtered. If people understand that you have feelings, they will tease and humiliate you. The other guy will get the promotion. The highest ranked person is the highest paid person. The highest paid person is the sociopathic person who gets the job done. We don't ask questions about how many bodies, how many jobs, how many families lay in the wake of the hostile takeover. You got the deal done. You may have manipulated a few senators, bribed a few this, given a few drinks. Doesn't matter. You got the job done. You're at the figurehead, the high-rank individual in a sociopathic cult, where the enemy is the feminine. The enemy is the one that would say, is this really what we want to do with our business? Shut him up. Shut him up. Whoever's asking that is the enemy, because it is the enemy of that which would allow us to rape and turn real value into a symbol of value. See, when you destroy a company that is providing families a stable, untraumatized home, that's real value. And when you destroy that value to create digits, that's a symbol of value. Turning real value into symbols of value. The worship of the false god. The false god, the symbol over the substance. When the salary paid to a school to take care of a child is valued more than the child, so the child is sold out. The child is sold out to retain the salary. That's a false god. The symbol over the substance. The child is the substance around which the entire school was formed. But the child is sacrificed to retain the money. It's a false god. Now, deep in my pit, at 6 years old, as I'm learning to become the abuser, as I'm learning to be as disgusted with my mother's feelings as my father is disgusted of my mother's feelings, to be disgusted with my own feelings, as disgusted as my mother and father are disgusted with my feelings, as they are disgusted with their own feelings, as the culture is disgusted with their feelings, as I'm learning the art of disgust towards my feminine and feel like I belong. I've now risen in rank. I now am part of the war tribe. And I am not any longer part of my own heart. There is some part of me that goes very dark. It goes very dark because I feel that some part of me is unspeakably cruel. And I feel ashamed. I feel ashamed of my cowardice. My cowardice at turning away from the truth. To not be hit. To not be hated. We're not talking about a healing of the wound and the terror and the need to be held and the need to be loved. We're talking about a cessation of being hated and being hit. The greatest terror of that 4 and 5-year-old. the cessation of being hit. And I know that I am no longer standing by a good friend of mine on the inside. But I also know that, as with every gang, there is an initiation. And the initiation into the gang of my cult is to do to my siblings that which was done to me. To destroy and decimate their feminine side. And I know that I feel sorrow about this, that I feel question about this, that I feel remorse, and that I feel sad and kind to them. But there is a new persona that has adapted from powerlessness and hopelessness. A new persona that has adapted from the powerlessness, the hopelessness, the desperation, the freezing, the panic of not being able to have hope, to survive, to breathe, that now has that hope because it's a dominator. It's part of the gang. It's been marked. That 6-year-old is desperate to belong. And he is systematically whacking away. Every sign of innocence, every sign of femininity, every sign of emotion, every sign of desperation and need in his younger siblings. And this is fueled by many things. I now belong to Dad. I too am a man of the world. I am not that which is hated by my father. I am not that which is not worth protecting by my mother. I am that which has the power. And my 6-year-old is mercilessly and passionately killing the innocents in my younger siblings, tormenting them, setting them up for this, making them feel miserable, making them feel small, embodying the cult, embodying the betrayal. And in a strange turnabout, as I take on the role of the abuser that I could not fight coming towards me, and I could not win. But now I can impose, and I can win as the abuser. My parents enact another betrayal. Whenever they abuse me or my siblings, it is our fault, etc., and we cannot win, and there's no apology, and there's no fairness, and da-da-da-da-da. But whenever I abuse my siblings, clearly with less impact, they betray and note the abuser in me. So first they abused me. Then they didn't help when I needed repair from the trauma of that abuse. Until the pain and the helplessness got so that the empathic hurt part of me died from consciousness. It went out of view into this funnel. And a new persona was born, the terrorizer, the dominator, the abuser, a new unconscious persona. This ought to please them, right? I'm now like you. In a shadow-adverse cult, in a cult that is committed to being blind of its own cruelty, but project that outside, I am now the new villain. They do not need to attack the feminine in my siblings as much because I am doing their dirty work for them. I have internalized the pattern. I know what they want. They do not want to feel. They don't want to get near their own vortice, which goes on as long as mine does. They don't want to feel. And infants, in their innocence, have the most luminous and beautiful possibility of taking anyone around them into the feminine, into the feelings. And it makes them a threat for a shame-based cult, for a chauvinistic cult. It makes them a threat. Not the cuteness, not the size, the vulnerability of feelings. The terror that a parent feels when they realize they love their child so much, they don't know what they would do if this. The terror of being thrust into their own feminine side that they don't know how to deal with in a cult that refuses to educate its people about half of the human psyche, other than to shame it, diminish it, patronize it, abuse it, rape it, disown it, make sarcastic jokes at its expense. The vast majority of sociopathic humor is the demeaning abuse of the feminine that we don't want to feel, so we nervously laugh. The shock of the sociopathic nature of treating a baby, a woman, one's own feelings, gets a good laugh in a sociopathic cult because the sadness cannot be felt. Can't be treated seriously anywhere in the cult, but it can be nervously laughed about, perhaps a beginning. I'm now doing the dirty work of my parents. I've choreographed myself to accomplish for them what they wanted to accomplish with me, to shut off my feelings. They are not proud of the little hints they get of their own cruelty, and are only too relieved to be able to dissociate themselves from the violence. Because now the parents enact a second betrayal. Well, a third betrayal. The first one was to commit the crime. The second one was not to repair it. The third one was to pretend there was nothing to repair. Now we're on to the fourth crime. Now the parents dissociate from their own sociopathic abuse pattern, much like the grandparents do with the parents. You see, the parents abuse the child, and then they become grandparents, and then they comfort the child from the parents' abuse. Grandparents, statistically, are significantly more healthy than the parents because the grandparent has dissociated their internal cruelty. They've given it all to their own child. So now their own child, internalizing it, is being the sociopath to the child. And the grandparents can say, "Isn't that sad? Let's rescue the child from the pattern we laid in the parent." There's always two sides within the psyche. The dominant side is the abuser. But when that is being represented, in this case by me, the eldest sibling, now the parents can step back a little bit because I'm killing off the innocence and the feelings. They're not threatened by them as much. They've already got the addiction and adrenaline distractions. If they come home and they see 3, 4 screaming children because I'm tormenting them, they don't need a distraction from their feelings. I've provided it for them. The loyalist. You want this done, I will do it for you. Just don't hit me. Don't hate me. I'll do whatever you need. I'll abandon my own soul. I'll look at mom the way you look at her dad. As an idiot. And I won't talk about the fact that you seem so desperately to need this idiot. If she's so dumb, why do you need her so much? You see, that takes him back to his feelings, so we'll deflect from that. We'll protect Dad from that part of the equation. He's got a little boy who's desperately looking for a mom. She offers hope, but then dashes that hope with her own dissociation, and he's pissed. He's pissed that his little boy does not have a healthy feminine protector in him or outside, and never did. So he's going to punish her by hating the very thing about her that he needs, by sarcastically putting it down, by joining the cult. So I'll be like you, Dad. Which, of course, a child is not sophisticated enough to understand that $1 in your hand is somehow different value than $1 in your hand than $1 in your hand. $1 is $1. Feminine energy is feminine energy. So if you want to kill the feminine energy in mom, that's $1 in her hand. If you don't like dollars, well, there's dollars in me. There's dollars in you. We'll kill them all. We'll kill them all. As I exercise the cruelty that was done to me, symmetrically, towards those which I have more power over, towards those who cannot block my abuse, because that is the pattern. I feel a certain sense of revenge, a certain sense of, I'm not going to let this be done to me. I get to be the one who does this. And that part of me seems dark and unforgivable. And some part of me watches. But I am not rewarded. I am not rewarded for my cruelty. My parents do not say, "Thank you for murdering the soul of your siblings, because we are so anxious and nervous about that terrain, we did not want to deal with it. You've done our work for us." No, they stepped into the grandparent role. They did not protect my siblings from the abuse any more than most grandparents protect the grandchildren from the abuse of their parents that they trained. But they stepped into the light shadow position. My parents never comforted me when they abused me, but they comforted my siblings when I abused them, which told the 6-year-old that somehow, even though I'm doing all my parents' dirty work, my parents are cowards. They don't want to be associated. In their gang, they want to use euphemisms. Let's put him under the ground. You mean shoot him in the head, boss, right? Put him under the ground. Shoot him in the head, boss, with a .45 or whatever. I don't want to get involved. Just take care of it. Just take care of it. We're a gang here. But I, as the head of the gang, want to be able to walk around and pretend that I'm somehow above it all. That because I didn't pull the trigger, somehow you're more scummy than me. Why do gang leaders of this ilk get so many followers if they weren't trained by their parents about the nature of a gang and its psychology? You want the benefits, but you don't want the costs. And you'll kill us for your mistakes. Why would anyone stay in that gang? Why would anyone stay the child of an American parent? It's the same question. Survival, security, love, and belonging in an abuse-based cult. I feel envious, and I feel the soul that lives on in me feels ashamed of what I'm doing and disgusted that I've capitulated and become the abuser. That which understands fair play in me feels disgust and superior to my parents, because I know that I'm bad and unlovable, but they're playing superiority. And I don't respect them for it. I understand that their need to feel superior to me is bigger than their need to love me and to lift the shame created by their shameful behavior. And I understand that I'm to be thrown under the bus, much like Donald Trump throws his own family and his own people under the bus to protect that which is less respectable, less honorable, that which is more honorable is to be thrown under the bus to protect lies, shadow, And I understand that they're going to do that. And I understand that that's my role. I understand that that's my role. My role is to be the evil one, so that my parents can look beautiful, so that they can pretend they have no idea why I'm doing this, that this has nothing to do with them. Maybe it's just normal kid stuff. You know. They need me to be a box that contains all of their shame and all of their problems. They need me to be the bad one. And so in 7 and 8, I go out of my way to pretend that I am bad. I go out of my way to pretend, meaning I don't feel like hurting this or that or the other, but if I see my parents watching, I will try and give them the suggestion that I'm a malicious, horrible person, so that they can complain about me, because I understand that this makes them happy. I tell narratives in a way that suggest that I am more horrible than I am, because I understand that in some way this facilitates my role within the family. One of my very first memories at 4 or 5 years old was making my sister laugh, making her cry, making her laugh, making her cry. And I was doing this completely unaware. I was like 4 years old. So when I became aware, it was indirectly. I became aware of myself through my father's eyes. Now, when I first looked up, I looked back from the outside and I said to myself, I'm making her laugh, I'm making her cry. There's something wrong with this, and I felt ashamed. And I wanted to turn away in shame. But then I observed something. I observed that my father had been watching me for a while. I observed that he was not protecting the innocence in my sister. And I observed that he was not afraid of my emotionality in this place. And I observed that on some level he wanted me to continue. And I also observed a sadness in his eyes. And heaven of heaven for a 4-year-old that can't bond with his father. I got the message. Dane, you and me are the same. We both like hurting people. It's sad, but it's true. And that's what bonds us together. That is our soul emotional bond. If you want to be like me and feel that you belong, you must own that you like hurting people. Because that's about the size of it when it comes to how we empathically relate. I know what you're feeling as you make your sister laugh and cry. I feel that too. I don't fully understand it, but I can tell you are my son. The discovery that I had a bond with my father was more exciting to me as a 4-year-old than the discovery that I was hurting people and ashamed of it. And so I continued. My one deep bond emotionally with my father in my whole life. My one peek behind the veil of the silence of shame that he would never talk about, that he would never deal with directly. And he never said a word about it. That was our little secret. A 4-year-old boy will do anything to bond with his father. Even torment the innocent, if that's the only basis of emotional connection. And it is the pattern of behavior and facial expressions that speak much louder than the words. His words were the opposite, of course, when he spoke. They had 30% of the impact. His presence, his pattern of thinking and feeling, his pattern of associating and dissociating, his pattern of coming alive and blocking you out, his pattern of giving attention and withholding attention. What he did and what he said had 70% of the impact. What he did and how he did it had 70% the impact. His words were way off in left field, often denying a schizophrenic split. He was, after all, sending us to a Waldorf school. This was taking place in a passive solar home to help the environment. He was the director of the Cultural Freedom Fund. He owned a metaphysical bookstore. He owned a health food store. He owned an organic food, health food restaurant. He protested the Vietnam War. He moved us out into nature so that we could be alone with what was beautiful. And all that we were was isolated, with the cult's shame-based abuse system residing in his biology. That was no more rescued, that was no more championed for him than it was for me. He could grasp certain crude ideas and say, I'm going to do that. But he could not stop the rage in his own body that would erupt when the feminine in another was given honor, while the feminine in himself had been persecuted since birth. And in a vast imbalance of power and in social isolation, the byproduct of that very natural wilderness, in social isolation, he inflicted those wounds that were done to him, for which there was no more support than the suspicious neighbors, than the landlord, than the clients who do not want to talk about this. Heaven forbid. But what's more interesting is the therapeutic environment. Can a repressed, traumatized 4- and 5-year-old in a state of desperate terror, who is in so much pain they don't know that they can bear to exist and look up, can they deal with a 50-fucking-minute hour? In my experience with well over $100,000 of therapy, he is not at this level. there are moments. There are elements of lifting the shame. But all that was ever needed for the 4 and 5-year-old was to be able to go into that terror and grief, into the horror, into the trauma of it all, into the loneliness, into the timelessness of it all, and to hang on to some adult who would not be sucked in and identify 100%, who would not drown, but who would go in there, and who would volunteer as an honor to fight and protect, who would embody the eviscerated masculine of the 4 and 5-year-old, who by 6-year-old had turned tail and run. When the monsters kept coming, and every head that was cut off was replaced by 3 more, the healthy masculine in the 4, 5, and 6-year-old ran off. The best way to survive is to dissociate from that which is innocent that is being protected. It's too costly. I'm not going to own it. I'm going to run as far as I can. Which means there's no one left in the psyche. There's no one left to protect that which is abandoned in the running off. You see, first my parents ran off. That leaves the inner masculine in an unformed template to try and protect that which is abandoned by the parents and the cult. Then he runs off because he's exhausted, terrified, traumatized, and he can't win. He runs off in shame. I couldn't protect the little one in me. I am unlovable. I am unforgivable because I ran off. I'm unforgivable. That's unprotectable. It's hopeless. It's helpless. And no one is coming to protect us. The terror, the loneliness, the shame, and the certainty of that emotional timeless trauma happening again and again and again, no matter what. You see, that 4 and 5-year-old kicked and screamed. He ran away. He hurt himself. He hurt other people. He fought back. He gave in. He was silent. He spoke out. He walked the round of possibility for a 4 and 5-year-old. And learned that going numb, going silent, freezing, dissociating was the only way out of being hit and hated again and again and again, of being alone. So he's caught. And there is no such thing as a protector or a healthy adult in his world. It doesn't exist. None of the smiling Waldorf parents or children or teachers or parents did a goddamn thing for him. They didn't understand the nature of the biology. He was left to develop a learning disability. You think you can learn when you're frozen and have a hard time breathing? Just give it a try. And everything that came out of this abuse pattern was laid at his feet. Because the parents are superhuman, of course. They're the heroes. They're the ones that would never let one of their children be raised at one of those plebeian and inferior public schools. No, their child is at Waldorf school because we're such great parents. And we're even better parents. We run a nonprofit, we do this. We're even better than that. We eat the best food, No TV, no radio. You're just alone with us and our abuser. No, this does not have to do with us. This has to do with the innate evil nature of our children, who despite all that we do and all that we did, despite the fact that their life is so many times better than our childhood, despite the fact that they have passive solar heat rather than gas heat and this, that, they should be coming out like great kids. But we did our part. We did what the hippies told us to do for peace and love. And the hippies didn't include a trauma manual. They didn't want to deal with the past. Peace and love. Just go on, don't deal with the emotions, etc., etc., etc. And here are these kids coming up, ruining our lives. They were supposed to validate us, that move on and do this and all this. And here they come with their depression and their anger defiant disorder and this and their ADHD and, oh my goodness, the poor parents. It's laid at the feet of the child. You have a learning disability. You can't control your temper. You are a cruel person. And you have to take responsibility for that at 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever years old. Your poor parents are at their wits' end. You have to think about them. Pacing the floor, you're ruining their lives. You, the P. These giants have no control. Nothing. It's my fault. I'm a bad person. I'm a horrible person. It's my fault. First they tormented me and it seemed like they wanted me to hurt all of the feminine in me, but now I'm a bad person. It's my fault. I'm so lucky to have these parents. It's my fault. And there's a freezing that goes on. There's a freezing that goes on in 7 and 8. But there's another layer. And this is the betrayed loyalist. All of this is done to please the parents and deal with their unconscious desperation to avoid feelings and blame everything on their child. And I've taken their shame. And I've taken their blame. And I'm holding that I'm the bad one. They're not the bad one. I'm the bad one. I'm holding it. And I'm feeling properly remorse, and I've gone numb. I've lost 60% of who I am to please my parents. But there's a dissociated part, a sociopathic part, a manipulator that is born into this environment because there's no answer to empathy. What is being done to an infant to this point is nothing more or less than the genocide on a systemic level of the feminine psyche, and then putting the blame of that genocide on an infant who has no more control of that than any infant in human history, than anyone handcuffed in the size of a pea. This is an act of deep and profound dehumanization that is an externalization of that which has been robbed and destroyed in my parents, in the child. And some part of me knows exactly what's going on. but it can't feel. It's the manipulator. So it sees all this terrain, and it sees all this terrain in my parents, and it sees all this terrain. And nothing can be done about it. There's no technology, no therapy, no vocabulary. Nothing can be done about any of this. But there's one part that this part wants. It wants validation that it did all of this for the parents. It wants the parents to step off their high white horse and acknowledge, you gave these orders. You may not have written it out on paper and said, let's see, we'd like you to kill off your own femininity so that you didn't feel, because we don't want to feel our own femininity because it's too painful. We'd like this, signed parents. No, that would have been easy. It would have been nice if you did. That would have been a little bit ethical, wouldn't it? To have a clear business plan. And we will raise you as our child and let you belong on these conditions. That would have been an ethical, or at least a transparent. And you'd be able to empathize. Of course, you were 5 years old. You signed the fucking contract. Be ethical. You guys, on the other hand, you could have offered a 5-year-old a little better terms. They had a lot of negotiating power, didn't they? 5-year-old, survival, security, love, and belonging. You held all the strings. We could deal with that. This part wants one thing. I did it for you. Let's have you step off the superiority game and stop making us all feel like shit. Because by this time, the pattern is rife within the family. And the parents are blaming all the siblings. It's all their fault, of course, not their own. It's each other's fault. But even that isn't direct, because when Sherilyn says to Michael, or indirectly, of course, because they don't want to deal with the backlash. So, your father did so and so. That's why I lied to you and blah 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 blah. blah. Your father. It's not my husband. No, your father. And of course, why didn't you do the? Well, your mother. Perhaps you'd like to talk to your mother. Perhaps we wouldn't like to be in the middle of your juvenile fights. Perhaps we wouldn't like to be set up to be humiliated again. Perhaps we'd like to have some adults in a juvenile cult that doesn't know how to teach in a chauvinistic cult that it would never occur to a cult as sophisticated as ours to teach relationship skills in high school where everyone's relationship is shit. No, we're too sophisticated. Algebra, you're gonna need it. You're gonna need it. Just wait until you're getting a divorce with battered this, with a criminal record. Just wait until you whip out your algebra exam at the police officer and explain. You weren't troubled by domestic violence, such trifles and this and that. You were an important masculine cult figurehead learning algebra at the finest schools in the land. Don't they understand? You didn't have time to study domestic violence. 1 in 3 domestic relationships in the United States populated with domestic violence. You didn't have time for such trifles. More importantly, your teachers, they couldn't be bothered to tell you why their fucked up marriage at home, etc., is falling apart, and why the fuck are we teaching you algebra and tell you the goddamn truth would actually let you think? No. We did this for you. We're ruining the best years of our lives. Your teachers ruined the best years of their life for you, to teach you algebra that you never knew use a day in your life. They ruined it. It's like for you. Your parents ruined the best years of their life, and then they ruined the best years of their life for themselves. For each other, it's like, I gave you the best years. It was your father I gave the best years to, and your mother that I spent all that money on, and da-da-da-da-da. Don't you understand? It was all for you. All of this cruelty, all of this stupidity, all of this insanity, all of this abuse, all of this willful ignorance, all of this domination, all of this trauma, we did it for you. The least you could do is get through all those numb and dissociated feelings and feel grateful. The least you could do. Because we did it for you. We wonder why we're in a cult where when someone says, I love you, the other person starts panicking. Oh my gosh, not that. Not that. Not being shamed, abused, violated and stuff for me. Not that, get the fuck thing away from me. Where do you think we learn that physiological response? It's when all the abuse in a cult that won't look at itself gets nicely recoated with a little language upgrade, nicely repainted. All the nuclear weapons that used to say nuclear weapons, hazard, they get a nice whitewash paint job on them, right? And they say, love and peace. Ignite here, love and peace. Suddenly love and peace is not such a good thing anymore, is it? After a few million people have died, get away from that love and peace thing. It's been relabeled.